I'm DaRon.
I'm Roniel. And good thing you didn't say you were Roniel this time.
I had to think about it really, really hard. I had to
Oh
picture
man,
myself. Am I Roniel or DaRon material?
I think some people get it confused because Duran just did not sound like a name that would look like it would place for you, which is why it's so funny in the first place.
Yes.
But before we even go into the topic at hand, I have to say that I had started watching, and I'm very late, but Space Force, and
Ah,
man, do I have a lot of freaking questions to ask you because a lot of the stuff in here looks like it pertains to NASA, the Air Force. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that I'm like, they're talking about somebody and they're making fun of some people in general. I know they're making fun of the military as well and scientists and stuff like that, but it was just it was just too bad and too funny. Like the whole point with them thinking that guy thinking that the chimpanzee or the whatever the ape we can go out there and put on the
that was so
like.
funny.
I was like, what the fuck? And he was going insane, and then he ate the dog. That was the sad part. Like, what the fuck? Like, I was dying. I was like, why didn't I look at this sooner?
Oh, that was so funny. And then he turns himself over to the Chinese.
Yeah, man. Oh my god. And he was like, no, don't go there, don't go there. And I'm just like, oh my god. And he's sitting there doing this the whole time. And I'm
Yes.
just like, oh my god. I wonder if he's going to beat up the Chinese. You know, like if he's going to do something crazy. But um it was just the episode, like I'm gonna watch some more tonight, but it was hilarious. And I was like, I have a lot of questions. Maybe offline I can ask you some of these questions, but I feel like it's got to be hitting NASA. And if you haven't already, and I'm sure you have, but some people like myself are late to, everything. If you haven't already, go check out Space Force. It is hilarious. It is to die for. It is even funnier than Spaceballs.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
definitely go check it out. But
Yes.
let's talk about the topic of threat modeling.
We had a discussion previously. We did threat modeling when we were at Highland, and I helped demonstrate how threat modeling should be done and done right. And I know one of the things that I see a lot is many organizations doing it completely, utterly, totally wrong. And you may ask yourself, what makes me think that? And the answer is because threat modeling becomes such an exercise that no one wants to do it. So remember, when we were at Highland, if you mentioned threat modeling and risk assessments, everyone would groan, their eyes would roll, and they wouldn't want to be in the room.
Yeah.
I know some of the developers sat there and they told me in confidence, so I won't say their names, but how they were very frustrated because the way that threat modeling was done, it would be multiple days, and it was just so boring and such a burnout for them that they didn't want to do it again. And so a lot of the teams stopped doing it, and their threat models would get older and older and older. Because one of the things that we see is as we move to agile and similar, be it extreme programming or what have you, similar other methodologies, things like threat modeling seems to just fall off the face of the earth because it's oftentimes seen as this giant monolithic task. And importantly, threat modeling, and we'll go into it, threat modeling is a key part of a risk assessment. In fact, I would argue that the threat modeling process should be the driver behind a risk assessment, and we'll discuss that just a smidgen as we go through this. This topic is going to be a multi-episode topic because it is one that's fairly large, but hopefully, whether you're new to threat modeling or you've been doing it for a long time, you'll at least find some nuggets that are useful and something that's maybe interesting for you.
And also, I hope you guys either learn why it's important to do threat modeling, how to do it right, and how not to make it boring.
Yes,
Because a lot of people don't really understand it, so it becomes boring anyway because they're spending their time spinning their wheels trying to explain it.
that's right. That is right. The reality is you should be able to do these components in chunks And I would actually recommend that people time box themselves and say, okay, well, we're going to do an hour for the main portion, and the entire thing we'll have done in 3 hours at most. And I say an hour for the main portion, and we'll get to why, but that main portion actually should be an hour of fun. It should be an hour of imagination and ingenuity, and people just shooting things out that they think would be would make sense, something that they think that nobody has thought about within the team and that may impact the system. So one of the first things to really understand is when we do threat modeling, there are multiple steps. So we've got 7 different steps. The truth is there are 8. And the 8th one is hidden. We'll get to it. So our first step is obviously you have to identify the system and the boundaries. So if you don't understand what it is you're going to be doing a threat model for, there's simply no way you can do it. Can't be done. I can't threat model for a cloud. And by that I mean a real cloud, some nebulous idea that I haven't really contemplated in any detail or to any degree at all. Now, I can threat model on an abstract concept. We can sit there and threat model on, hey, what if we have a web server and it has a back end and it has a front end, and it's going to maybe have some of this kind of data, but I at least have to have that idea. The truth is, the more data, the better. And the beautiful part, and we'll get into this, is when identifying the system and the corresponding boundaries, you shouldn't have to do much of anything that you aren't already doing as a part of just standard best practices for software development or system development. This applies to systems, this applies to software. It works with DevOps, DevSecOps, it works with waterfall, it works with everything. The next thing you have to do is identify that technical scope. We'll get to what that really means, but in short, the technical scope means the scope of our threat modeling. So what is it we're actually trying to achieve? What's the perspective we're looking at when we do this threat model? And what is it we care about? And really what we're talking about when we say this is we have to understand that any system I can look at from different layers. And depending on what layer I'm looking at the system from, I'm going to get different results. It can be a completely different threat model. So the next thing that you have to do is identify your threat actors, your threat agents, and your threat vectors. And we'll go into a little more what that means, but long story short, you have to understand who it is and what it is that you are modeling against. And then you also have to understand how they might actually do something. So your threat vectors are a conduit for something to occur, whereas your threat actors and your threat agents are organizations, people, natural disasters, things of that nature. After that, you can actually identify your threats. I know we've done all this crazy work. We've been modeling something, but up until this point, we weren't modeling threats. What we were really doing was identifying what would go into causing the threat. And we'll go into the difference between a threat and a vulnerability and what that actually means. A finding and a vulnerability, a flaw and a vulnerability, a bug and a vulnerability at that point. I know.
Are we actually going into this is because people don't understand what a vulnerability is, the difference between a flaw and a vulnerability, what a threat is. They don't understand none of it, and they misconstrue it, and then they say things that make them look stupid. So if you guys are tuning in, pay very close attention when we get to, all of this is stuff you need to pay attention to, but I'm saying pay attention because this is very important in order to be able to understand what we're talking about.
After you've identified your threats, so after we've identified what our system is, how we're going to look at our system, who and what might cause problems for our system, how they might cause problems for our system, and what those problems might be, The next thing we have to do is identify how we can mitigate those problems, how we can prevent those problems, period, how we can resolve them in some way, shape, or form, how we can just accept them, that happens, and then any other considerations that we may have tied to our threats, etc. And once we're done with that, we actually calculate our risk, and then we can select our remediation, our mitigation, or our acceptance based on that calculation. Now, the last untold step is to have someone else review your threat models. It's a great thing to go through and do the exercise yourself, but if no one else reviews it, you could have easily missed something that's absolutely positively important, or you could have misconstrued something. So always have someone else take a peek at it and let you know their thoughts.
So these are, just to go back with that, the people who is doing the threat modeling. Is it a developer? It's a security person that's doing the threat modeling. Doesn't matter who does it, because normally it may be the developer. But are you saying the developers would be doing the threat modeling and then a security expert would come and review it, or would their team review it and then they would have a security person review it? How would that actually work in a real environment?
That's a good question. What you're really asking is the difference between, and I'm going to throw around terms that I think are silly, but it's apropos here. The difference between DevOps and DevSecOps, right? So in a DevOps environment, what would happen is your development and operations teams would sit down, they'd threat model, and then they'd hand it off to security. And security would look at it. Now, the problem that a lot of people have with that model is it honestly is really a waterfall model, because now security becomes a choke point where if security doesn't like what they're seeing, they'll cut it off and you'll have nothing but trouble. You'll hate your life for it. If we look at it from a DevSecOps perspective, what we have is your security liaison, and we've discussed security liaison versus security champion. Your security liaison would be involved. So they would be in there and they'd be helping to guide the threat modeling process. And remember, so really, as this tip says, threat modeling shouldn't all be done in one sitting. You shouldn't try to find all the threats and identify all of the boundaries and identify everything from all of these different scopes and all of this other crazy multivariate analysis in a single go, because you will exhaust yourself. And that's another problem with going through and saying, okay, well, the development team is going to do it, or the operations team is going to do it, and then they're going to hand it off to security. Because what they hand off to security should be incomplete. It's complete for that exercise, meaning they've run through all of those steps and they've identified mitigations and they've identified things that they can resolve, and they've identified things that they're just going to accept. But they've only done it for a sliver. They only took a single vantage point at a time. They didn't try to exhaust themselves doing a 10-day exercise. So security would get it, and what would they do? They'd immediately shoot it down saying this is incomplete, right? That's I think one of the biggest problems with the way a lot of organizations do it, is this is supposed to be a living document. Just like every other document, every other artifact within the development and operations lifecycle, they're all supposed to be works in progress intended to get better and better over time. Threat modeling should be no different. Your risk assessment, your threat assessment should be no different. That's the point of continuous monitoring, by the way.
Do people actually do continuous monitoring?
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think anyone does. And I'm being honest here.
Do they even know what the term means? Because I think a lot of people, when they consider continuous monitoring, they're thinking about 24/7 eye on glass.
Right, which isn't the case.
Yep.
See,
I agree.
That's a good question. Continuous monitoring, of course. So continuous monitoring is supposed to be where you are continuously examining the system for threats that you didn't know existed, for changes that may impact the system, for vulnerabilities that may impact the system, for attacks that may impact the system, and just for how the general environment is changing, or how the world around the environment is changing, and you are adjusting your security and or your system to match all of those changes. And that would mean that you would have someone reviewing logs continuously. It would also mean, though, that you would have someone examining the design, making sure that the design is up to date, making sure that the architecture documentation is up to date, making sure that the system is adjusting to the changing world. The beautiful thing about a proper continuous monitoring program is Agile is made for it. Extreme programming is made for it. Paired programming is made for it. Really, all of the models that aren't stagnant are really designed for that, because continuous monitoring is ultimately about continuous improvement and understanding that there is no done state, no ready done state. It's just we continuously work on getting better and better and better and adjust the system to the realities of the world.